It was just a wedding photograph. A bride and groom, side by side, in the year 1894. Their faces frozen in time, formal, composed, nothing unusual at first glance. A portrait like thousands of others taken that decade. But look closer. Look at her hands. The bride's hands tell a story that words never could. Scars, deep, deliberate marks etched into her skin. What happened to this woman? And why is she standing beside a man who, by every law and custom of his time, should never have married her? Why did someone hide this photograph for over 130 years? This is not just a wedding photo. It's evidence of a secret so dangerous it could have cost both of them their lives. Today, we find out what really happened. If stories like this pull you in, stick around, because what comes next will change the way you look at this chapter of American history. The demolition crew was scheduled to arrive Monday morning. By Friday, the house would be nothing but rubble and memory. 11 years of legal battles, unpaid taxes, and quiet neglect had finally caught up with it. The old Victorian at the end of Oakwood Road, on the outskirts of Natchez, Mississippi, once a symbol of wealth and southern grandeur, was about to disappear for good. Helen Marsh saw the house for the first time on a humid afternoon in late August 2023. She worked as a senior archivist for the Mississippi Department of Archives and History, and she'd volunteered to lead the final documentation effort before the wrecking ball came through. Routine work, the kind she'd done dozens of times before. Photograph the rooms, catalog whatever remained, file the paperwork, move on. But this house felt different. The moment she stepped onto the warped porch boards, something shifted in the air. The smell of rot and age hung heavy, tangled up with the sweetness of magnolia blooms drifting in from somewhere out back. Inside, the walls were streaked with old water damage, and the floor groaned under every step. Furniture lay overturned and broken, left behind by whoever had lived here last. An old woman named Dorothy. According to the county's own records, she had died alone in 2012. No children, no siblings, no one left to claim what she'd owned. Helen moved through the ground floor methodically, her camera clicking in the silence. Parlor, dining room, kitchen. Nothing remarkable, just the ordinary wreckage of a life that had ended and been forgotten. It was the attic that changed everything. The stairs leading up were narrow and unstable, several steps missing outright. Helen climbed carefully, her flashlight cutting through the dark. The attic was cramped, the air thick with dust that stung her eyes. Broken furniture, stacks of moldering newspaper, a child's rocking horse, missing one leg, and in the far corner, half buried beneath a collapsed shelf, a small leather trunk. Helen knelt beside it. The leather had cracked and peeled with age, but the brass latches still held. She worked them open slowly, her fingers trembling with an anticipation she couldn't quite explain. Inside, wrapped in layers of brittle newspaper dated 1932, was a photograph. She lifted it into the light. A wedding portrait. A white man in a dark suit. A black woman in a simple white dress. And, inscribed along the bottom edge in fading ink, a date. 1894. Helen's heart stopped. Helen didn't sleep that night. She sat at her desk in Jackson, the photograph propped against her monitor, unable to look away. The faces stared back at her. The groom, his jaw set in quiet defiance. The bride, chin lifted, her eyes carrying something that looked almost like triumph. But it was the hands that haunted her. Under a magnifying glass, the details became impossible to ignore. The bride's hands, folded gently at her waist, bore a network of scars, thick, ropey marks crisscrossing her palms, circling her wrists. These weren't the scars of accident or illness. They were the scars of bondage. Rope burns. Shackles, tools gripped until the flesh tore, healed and tore again. Helen had studied photographs of formerly enslaved people before. She recognized the pattern immediately. But the Civil War had ended in 1865, nearly 30 years before this photograph was taken. By 1894, This woman should have been free. She should have been living without chains, without an overseer, without the kind of labor that leaves marks like these. So why did she still carry fresh wounds? The next morning, Helen reached out to James Whitfield, a historian at Howard University who specialized in post-Reconstruction Southern history. She sent him high-resolution scans of the photograph and waited. His reply came within 2 hours. "Where did you find this?" She explained the abandoned house, the leather trunk, the newspaper wrapping, dated 1932. "Helen," he wrote back, slower this time, "I think I know what we're looking at. Those scars are consistent with something called debt peonage." He laid it out for her. After the war, plantation owners across the South used legal loopholes to keep black laborers tied to their land sharecropping contracts written with impossible terms, fabricated debts that could never be paid down, vagrancy laws that turned unemployment itself into a crime. On paper, the workers were free. In practice, they couldn't leave. If they tried, they were beaten. Some were worked to death. Helen looked at the photograph again, the bride's scarred hands, the groom standing beside her, close, protective. "But she married him," she said aloud, "to no one. She married the son of her captors." "That's exactly what we need to find out," James wrote back. Who was she? Who was he? And how did they end up standing together in that photograph? The search had begun. The trail started with property records. Helen spent the next 2 weeks buried in the Adams County Courthouse archives, deed transfers, tax filings, census pages stretching back to before the war. The Victorian house on Oakwood Road had been built in 1887 by a family that relocated from Virginia after the surrender. Before 1865, they had owned a sprawling cotton plantation and more than 300 enslaved people. After emancipation, they sold their Virginia land, moved south into Mississippi, and rebuilt their fortune through sharecropping. The patriarch, a hard, unyielding man named Cornelius, ran the new operation the same way he'd run the old one. His 3 sons managed the day-to-day labor, collecting debts, enforcing contracts, making sure the families living on the land could never quite work their way free of it. In the 1870 census, Helen found a laborer listed on the property. A girl named Eliza, 12 years old, recorded simply as colored and employed as a domestic worker. By 1880, Eliza was still there, 22 now. Still classified as a servant, still bound to the same family that had once owned her mother. But the 1900 census told a different story entirely. Eliza was no longer listed as a servant. She appeared as the wife of Thomas Cornelius's youngest son. 2 children were listed beside her, a boy named Samuel, a girl named Grace, both recorded as mulatto. Helen sat back, pulse racing. The bride in the photograph was Eliza, the groom was Thomas, and somehow impossibly they had married, started a family, defied every law and custom built to keep that from ever happening. But the wedding photograph was dated 1894. The census was 1900. 6 years stood between them, and Helen had no idea what had filled that gap. She needed the family's private papers. County records showed that a distant relative had donated a collection of documents to the Natchez Historical Society back in 1978, someone who, according to the donation letter, wanted nothing further to do with the family's legacy. The boxes had sat in storage ever since. Uncatalogued, untouched, Helen made the call that same afternoon. The Natchez Historical Society operated out of a converted antebellum home on Pearl Street, its shelves lined with slowly deteriorating documents and half-forgotten artifacts. The curator, an elderly man named Walter, led Helen down to a basement storage room where 12 cardboard boxes sat stacked against the wall, furred with dust. "Nobody's touched these in 40 years, Walter said. "Good luck." Helen got to work. The boxes held a chaotic mix of personal letters, legal documents, business receipts, and family photographs. She sorted them by date, photographing each page, slowly building a timeline of what this family had done in the decades after the war. The letters painted a plain picture of the sharecropping, business crop yields, equipment purchases, complaints about workers who weren't producing enough. In the third box, tied together with a faded ribbon, she found what she'd been looking for: a bundle of labor contracts. Each one followed the same pattern. A worker signed an agreement to labor on the family's land in exchange for housing, food, and a share of the harvest. But the fine print told a different story. Workers were charged for their tools, their lodging, their food, even the seeds they planted. Interest accrued monthly. Missed production quotas meant penalties. And if a worker tried to leave before the debt was paid, they could be arrested for breach of contract. It was slavery with a different name on the paperwork. Among the contracts, Helen found one belonging to Eliza, dated 1867, when she was 9 years old. The document listed her not as an enslaved person, since slavery was now illegal on paper, but as a debtor. Her mother had died the year before, still owing money to the estate. Eliza had inherited that debt at 9 years old, and with it, a lifetime bound to the land. Helen ran the numbers. Based on the interest rates and penalties written into the contract, Eliza's debt would have taken more than 100 years to repay. She had been born free and sentenced to bondage anyway. Thomas was different from his brothers. The letters made that clear almost immediately. William and Robert, the two older sons, were devoted to their father's vision of the business. They managed the laborers with the same efficiency and cruelty Cornelius had taught them, extracting every ounce of profit while keeping workers trapped in endless cycles of debt. Their letters described beatings and punishments with the same flat tone they used for weather and crop prices. Workers who tried to run were dragged back in chains. Thomas barely appeared in the business correspondence at all. When he did, his tone was distant, almost reluctant, as if the whole enterprise embarrassed him. Then Helen found a letter dated March 1891, addressed to a law firm in New Orleans, written in Thomas's hand. "I am seeking clarification," Thomas wrote, "on whether a debt holder may unilaterally forgive a debt without the consent of other family members who share ownership of the contract. The situation is delicate, and I require absolute discretion." Helen's hands were shaking by the time she finished reading. Thomas had been planning something. Over the following months, the correspondence showed him quietly consulting attorneys across Louisiana and Mississippi, always careful, always emphasizing secrecy. His father and brothers couldn't know. By late 1892, he had his answer. Under Mississippi law, a debt holder could forgive a debt outright if he held sole ownership of the contract. Thomas would need to buy out his family's share. In January 1893, he told his father he wanted to invest in a textile mill up in Jackson and needed capital. Cornelius, pleased, finally, that his youngest son was showing some business sense, agreed to release Thomas's inheritance early, including his share of the family's labor contracts. Eliza's was among them. On February 14, 1893, Thomas signed a certificate of debt forgiveness. Helen found it pressed flat between two unrelated letters, as if someone had hidden it there on purpose. Eliza was free. In 1893, Eliza was 35 years old. She had spent every year of her life on that same land, working the same fields, serving the same family. She had never learned to read. She had never traveled beyond the county line. She had never known a single day without a debt hanging over her. And now Thomas was offering her something that must have felt impossible. Helen found the next piece of the story in a journal tucked beneath the labor contracts, Thomas's own, covering the years 1892 through 1895. The entries were short, but they said enough. March 3, 1893. Told E that her debt is forgiven. She did not believe me at first, showed her the document. She wept for an hour. April 12, 1893, E asked why I did this. I told her the truth, that I have watched her suffer since I was a boy, and I am ashamed of what my family has done. That I want to make it right. July 29, 1893, Father asked why E is no longer working in the fields. Told him she is ill. He does not suspect. William and Robert do not care enough to notice. November 15, 1893, E and I have spoken every day for months now. I did not plan for this, but I cannot deny what I feel. The entries grew more personal after that, more careful. Thomas and Eliza had fallen in love, a love that had no place in the world they lived in. If anyone found out, Thomas would be disinherited. Eliza could be killed. But by January, Thomas had made his choice. January 8, 1894, I asked E to marry me. She said yes. We both know what this means. We will have to leave. We will have to disappear. But I would rather live in exile with her than spend another day under my father's roof. The wedding photograph was dated February 22, 1894. They had married in secret somewhere beyond the reach of Thomas's family, and then vanished. For a long time, Helen had assumed interracial marriage in 1894 Mississippi was simply impossible. The state's anti-miscegenation laws were among the harshest in the country, up to 10 years in prison for both parties. A minister who performed such a ceremony could be fined and jailed. A witness who failed to report one could be charged as an accessory. So how had they done it? The answer came from an unexpected place. While researching the family's history, Helen had reached out to descendants of Natchez' black community, hoping someone might have an oral history that mentioned Eliza. One of them, a retired schoolteacher named Cora, wrote back with something Helen hadn't expected. My grandmother used to tell a story, Cora said, about a woman named Eliza who left a plantation near here. She said Eliza was helped by a white man who loved her. They went north to a place where they could marry legally. Illinois. Helen checked the records. In 1894, Illinois was one of the few states with no ban on interracial marriage. The trip from Natchez would have taken several days by train, passing through territory where Thomas and Eliza would have been in constant danger of discovery. But they made it. Helen contacted the Cook County Archives in Chicago and requested a search of marriage records from February 1894. 3 weeks later, a digitized certificate arrived in her inbox. Thomas and Eliza married February 22, 1894, in Chicago, Illinois, witnessed by a minister named Reverend Abraham Coles, who ran a church serving the city's black community. The photograph had been taken that same day. They had traveled more than 700 miles to find a place where their love could be made legal, risking imprisonment, violence. Everything for a single piece of paper that declared them husband and wife. But the question remained, what happened after? Thomas and Eliza didn't stay in Mississippi after the wedding. The 1900 census that placed them back in Adams County came 6 years later. Helen needed to know how they'd survived in between and how they'd found their way home at all. The answer was in the final pages of Thomas's journal. After the wedding, the couple settled in Chicago. Thomas found work as a bookkeeper. Eliza took in laundry. They lived in a small apartment on the south side, surrounded by a community of black families and immigrants who asked no questions about the pale man with the southern accent and his dark-skinned wife. For 3 years, they lived in something close to peace. Then, in 1897, word reached Thomas that his father had died a stroke, sudden and final. Cornelius passed away without ever learning what his youngest son had done. William, the eldest, inherited the estate and the business. Robert had already moved out to Texas. Thomas saw an opening. He wrote to William, claiming he'd been in Chicago for business reasons and wanted to come home. He said nothing about Eliza, nothing about a marriage. William, who had never been close to his brother, agreed to sell him a small parcel of land on the edge of the old family property, the very lot where, more than a century later, Helen would find a photograph in a leather trunk. Thomas and Eliza moved back to Mississippi in 1898. It was a calculated risk, and they knew it. They kept to themselves, avoiding Thomas's remaining family. The local black community quietly accepted Eliza as one of their own. The white community assumed Thomas was simply a reclusive bachelor with an unconventional household. Their children, Samuel and Grace, were raised in careful isolation, educated at home, shielded from a world that would never fully accept them. And the photograph stayed hidden, locked in the leather trunk Eliza kept beneath her bed. Their secret, their proof, their promise to each other. It couldn't last forever. In 1904, a local newspaper ran an editorial calling for stricter enforcement of Mississippi's anti-miscegenation laws, complete with a list of suspected violators in the region. Thomas and Eliza weren't named, but the warning was unmistakable. That same year, Thomas's brother William paid an unexpected visit. Helen found the encounter described in the last full entry of Thomas's journal. The final pages before the writing thinned out and stopped. October 17, 1904, William came today. He knows someone told him about Eliza, about the children. He stood on my porch and called me a disgrace to our family's name. Said I had 48 hours to send Eliza and the children away, or he would go to the sheriff. Thomas didn't comply. Instead, he gathered every document that proved what his family had built: the labor contracts, the debt records, the evidence of beatings and illegal detentions, and wrote a letter to a sympathetic newspaper editor in New Orleans, laying out in detail the system of debt peonage that had kept hundreds of black workers in bondage for decades after emancipation. He sent it on October 19, 1904. The response was fast. Federal investigators who had already been quietly building cases against debt peonage operations across the South descended on Adams County. William was arrested. The family's remaining land was seized. The workers who had been trapped there for generations, some of them for their entire lives, were finally, truly free. Thomas was never charged. His cooperation shielded him and his family from prosecution, but the cost was still high. He was shunned by white society, his name quietly erased from local histories. His role in the investigation buried and forgotten by everyone except the people it had freed. He didn't seem to mind. In his last letter to the New Orleans editor, he wrote, "I have spent my life trying to repair what my family destroyed. I do not expect forgiveness. I only hope my children will live in a world where love is not a crime." Helen finished her research in the spring of 2024, 8 months tracing the lives of 2 people through archives, census records, journals, and oral histories, piecing together, fragment by fragment, a portrait of extraordinary courage. Thomas died in 1923 at 67. Eliza lived 12 years longer, passing in 1935. They were buried side by side in a small cemetery outside Natchez, their graves marked by nothing but 2 plain stones bearing their first names. Their children lived quiet lives. Samuel became a carpenter. Grace worked as a seamstress. Neither ever married. Neither ever spoke publicly about their parents. The photograph passed down through the family in silence, generation to generation, until it reached Dorothy Thomas and Eliza's great-granddaughter, who kept it hidden in a leather trunk until the day she died. Helen understood why. For more than a century, the story of Thomas and Eliza had been too dangerous to tell. It complicated the story white Southerners liked to tell themselves about the end of slavery. It exposed the brutal machinery of debt peonage, dressed up as legitimate business. And it proved, plainly, that love could cross a line society had declared uncrossable even when every law in the state said otherwise. But now, finally, it could be told. Helen published her findings that fall in a regional historical journal. The story was picked up by national outlets soon after. Historians and genealogists began combing archives for other hidden marriages, other buried photographs, other stories of resistance that had been quietly erased from the record. Cora, the retired schoolteacher whose grandmother's story had cracked the case open, traveled to Natchez to visit the graves. She brought flowers and a printed copy of the wedding photograph and set it gently against the stones. "You deserved better," she said. "But you made your own kind of justice." The scars on Eliza's hands told the story of everything she had survived. The photograph told a different story, one of 2 people who looked straight into a camera in 1894. In a city 700 miles from home, and refused to let anyone erase what they had chosen.